Hallelujah. Torah Mashabeach. Wa Kol HaKavod LeYahuwah Eloheinu. Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Avinu Malkeinu, B'Shem Mashiach, Yahoshua, HaGoel, HaMelech. Amen. First and foremost, I want to give all thanks and praises, all esteem to Yah, who is our Elohim, the Elohim of our fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Yitzhak, the Elohim of Yaakov, our Father and our King, in the name of Messiah Yahoshua, who is our Redeemer and our King, and also our Mashiach. Amen. To greet all of you all, the Bukarim, the Yemot, the Morim, Achim, Achiot, the Yaladim, with the words of peace on this Shabbat day, Shabbat Shalom Aleichem, and pray that this finds each and every one of you all in great spirits and great health, truly reposing and refreshing yourselves on this Shabbat before Pesach. So it's a very high Shabbat, very, very high as we enter into our new year and our new holy day calendar, with the first feast of the year quickly approaching us. I want to offer Yashar Koach to the Morim for their reading of this week's Parsha, as well as for Moray's M70's offering of a sweet savor to Yah. Very insightful, very reflective, very powerful. Told our Rabbah for that, Moray M70 and Moray Shebanaya. So today, well, let me kind of preface. Last week, a week ago today, as a matter of fact, I had an interesting conversation with a brother that I know here who is a pretty newcomer into African consciousness in general. He doesn't necessarily subscribe to the Israelite milieu. However, he does hold a Pan-African perspective. Relatively new. He's a first generation, quote unquote, African in America. His parents are from Liberia and Sierra Leone, respectively. His mother being a Liberian, his father being a Sierra Leonean. And so he had some qualms initially about repatriation. He reminded me of a speaking engagement we went to, in which Fred Hampton Jr. was the featured presenter. And the question that I asked the brother, was about what his perspectives was repatriation. And the brother who I'm speaking about was saying that, when he heard the question, he was like, here we go. He's back to Africa Negroes. Mosiah, watch what you're doing, please. And so, this was about 5 years ago. And he said, in reflection of when I spoke to the brother last week, he says, in reflection, I see the necessity of a vanguard. Now, it may not be for everybody, and that's the reality. He said, I see the necessity of a vanguard returning to the continent to establish the groundwork for a transition of our people to repatriate. And he asked me a question pretty much in follow-up of that, of what I thought about the South African issue. And I told him what is going on in South Africa is vital and necessary for the well-being of the continent of Africa. And if you all are not familiar with what is going on in South Africa, today is a day that I wanted to make it absolutely clear and known and understood about this land reform that is taking place with the EFF, the Economic Freedom Foundation or Federation, and the ANC, the Azanian Nationalist Congress. So we're going to really examine today some matters as relates to what is taking place in South Africa. We're going to look at some historical precedents. We're going to look at some political precedents. We're going to look at the spiritual precedents and the implications And prayerfully, we're going to tie this all together, because this is a very huge ordeal that is taking place. If any of you all are familiar with what's going on in South Africa, please give me a 1 in acknowledgement of what is going on in South Africa in terms of with the EFF and the ANC. If you're not familiar with it, which is just fine, give me a 0, because we want to really examine this and get into it today. I'm taking a little deviation from the partial and getting into this matter, because this is prophetic. Whether we see it or not, this is prophetic. We're going to see some dynamics that are relative to this particular matter that they won't even touch the surface in the mainstream. I guarantee you, they won't even touch the surface. They won't even make mention of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, due to some of the things that Yah has shown me to delve into and to bring to the surface. And I encourage you all to share these links, even this recording that I'm doing right now, to put this into perspective, because this is a much bigger issue than what we think it is just on the surface. You know, we're dealing with a dynamic of kingdom principle, really, when we get into the matter that we're going to get into with this particular study and presentation of articles. I want to present these articles to you in light of this issue that's going on in South Africa. I don't have a title for this particular offering, because this is just what it is. It's just, that's significant. So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and present to you the first article, which comes to us today from the Black Agenda Report, just to really give us an overarching perspective of this issue that is developing in South Africa. It is coming to us from the Black Agenda Report. It is written by Kwali Nzito. It's called A Tale of Three Apartheids and Land Conundrums. And she's going to present all the players in this matter here. Or he is, Slika Kwali. Right. Very much so, Amore Shebanaya. So, when you access this article, Bavakasha, give me a 4 in acknowledgement of your receipt of the article. This is again entitled A Tale of Three Apartheids and the Land Conundrums. I want to welcome each and every one of you who have recently entered into Hebrew Vision, as well as those of you who are regulars and have fellowship with us regularly. All right, so without any further ado, the word apartheid achieved global notoriety during the height of white rule in South Africa. It then extended at least to one other country where blatant state-sanctioned bigotry went hand in hand with democracy: Israel. The underlying creed fueling racist practices was white supremacy with its Eurocentric beginnings. Racism historically informed much of the imperial/colonial Caucasian dealings with other societies, beginning in earnest during the voyages of discovery inaugurated by Christopher Columbus with a slaughter of millions, massive human dislodgements under the umbrella of slavery, unprecedented disposition, and the theft of entire far-flung continents were to follow. Question: who was the Pope that gave sanction, or that gave permission to Cristobal Colon, who was an Ashkenaz or Sephardic European Jew, to go and discover these lands? Does anybody know who the Pope was and what that Pope was responsible for, and one of the most impacting things that he has done? Who was the Pope during Cristobal Colon's not innocent 1492? There's a Showtime series that came out about this man and his son. That's a hint. His son, who has left a very indelible impression on Western Christendom. There you go. Rodrigo Borgia, also known as Pope Alexander VI, whose son Cesare Borgia gives us not only the protagonist of Niccolo Machiavelli's book, The Prince, but he also gives us the personage on the image of who the world now knows as Jesus Christ, and his son's name is Cesare or Cesare Borgia. But this is Pope Alexander VI, who followed up on Pope Nicholas V's the papal bull of Dum Diversas to go and further enslave African peoples and to claim lands of who they call the savage, and to either keep them in perpetual enslavement or to bring them into the domain of Christendom. Very interesting notation right there. So, separate but equal: Uncle Tom, Jim Crow, segregation, racial discrimination, civil rights violations, colonialism, assimilation, conquistadors, Bantustans, and other innocuous hollow terms intended to attenuate and mitigate the crimes were firmly sown in the minds of the rank and file of the victors. Until recently, conquerors had a monopoly of relating and documenting history, with colonial subjects looking on submissively until the explosion of the anti-colonial struggles began to alter the course of event. In Africa and Asia especially, albeit fleetingly. The term apartheid, then, even if applied retroactively, is unlikely to gain currency to characterize patterns of imperial conduct of the past that had indistinguishable aims: dehumanize, denigrate, dispossess, and destroy the vanquished. Those are the aims of imperial conduct: to dehumanize, denigrate, dispossess, and ultimately to destroy the vanquished. But apartheid in practice, they most certainly were. Thus, the tripartite representatives of this practice, European settler and colonizing nations, apartheid South Africa, and Israel, should be so branded for the sake of calling a spade and for prioritizing substance over style. Lexical hair-splitting over events that held unbelievably cruel consequences for native indigenous peoples would not serve any useful purpose for any meaningful analyses or historical perspectives on land reforms in South Africa. Regardless of the lexicon used, the aftermath had inexorable parallels in all lands where European invaders established footholds, vanquishing natives and robbing them of their ancestral lands, sabotaging their reference points and ethos forever. No matter, too, that many native residents had freely roamed the landscapes for millennia, save for practitioners of intensive crop and or livestock husbandry. Even there, the concept of private ownership was alien to native societies, neutralized as it was by the overriding imperative of satisfying collective needs: family, a clan, a tribe, a societal, over individual greed. See, this is a distinct Western aberration of privatization. That is not an Oriental, Eastern mindset. That is not an indigenous people's mindset. Even in the West, where the Americas were inhabited by indigenous peoples, land ownership was not. We're going to get to Malema very soon. Trust and believe. Malema's a big part of this. Okay? But that is a very important distinction to make in terms of the idea of land ownership and privatization, which is a Western phenomenon, as opposed to the collectivist mindset of indigenous peoples. All right. So, wars were waged, to be sure, as territorial instincts spawned hostilities, especially at the interface of group contacts. Where empires resulted from skirmishes, few, if any, had reached the scale achieved by European conquest. Certainly none are documented to have ventured beyond local frontiers to distant continents for conquest and fashioning empires spanning much of the globe. So this was a very unique phenomenon that the West had launched, okay, under the umbrella of the Vatican. Now, let's make that distinct. This is all Vatican-sponsored ventures to bring forth the reality of the fourth kingdom, the fourth beast, and their globalist imperial pursuit and desire and lust. Okay? Now, globalization, we know, goes back to the days of Nimrod or Ninus, or you may even call him what's his name? Amraphel. Some other names that he's identified as, but that goes back to the plains of Shinar. All these pursuits of globalizing the world and making it one world under one king is a Babylonian dream. In European colonized lands, occupiers imported their concepts of land as assets to be traded much like any other merchandise. largely for the colonizers' benefit, of course, with the natives excluded in the real estate transactions. You have no part in this, they say. Consumerism had found expression in land ownership. Put in the sink, Mo. Long before it was to gain, and wash it out, ascendancy in the fecund junk ownership rampant in modern neoliberal capitalist economies that has now spanned the globe and whose cash flow is unidirectional toward the imperial metropolis of Rome. Let me add that there. All roads in the West lead to Rome. These factors encapsulate the motivation that mostly led to irreversible catastrophes: greed, gold spices land; God, one exclusive to the victors; money, glory, exceptionalism, and notions of superiority, cited with the author's italicized emphasis. Subsequent anti-colonial struggles made land a central issue. Land a central issue. Land is a central issue, targeted for contaminant and reverse the dispossessing drives aggressively pursued by colonial and invading powers. This was testament to the unwitting assimilation of Eurocentric land ownership principles by the colonized as integral to their struggles to liberate themselves from the colonial yoke. So this means that they adopted many of their oppressors' ways, okay, unwittingly. An astute idea, terra nullius, or the empty land myth, was invoked to justify massive land robberies. So the Europeans came to Africa saying this land was uninhabited by peoples. It was an empty land. So we claimed it as our own, which is an absolute myth and a lie. Few, if any, of the planet's countries can claim to be without large swaths of empty, uninhabited land within its borders, which, according to the logic implicit in such a notion, should invite occupation and appropriation from any and all comers. But this would invite derision and ridicule if aspirants to such land ownership were natives who summoned the same logic to occupy empty expanses of land. European prevalence is a God-given right, they say. The coveting of white acquisitions by colored folks is a God-given curse, according to the precepts of exceptionalism and white supremacy, Western civilization, long before they were to be codified into quasi-legal frameworks. All right. This really ensued after Charles Magnus, or Charles the Great, who we know as Charlemagne. This is when it really became prominent. This is like the 8th century. Okay. When like the quest, now the imperial Rome, before it became the Holy Roman Empire, was always imperial. It was always seeking to conquest lands. And this even goes back to Greece. But again, it has its roots in the Babylonian ideology. Let's be clear about that. So recently, South Africa's parliament voted to seize white-owned land without compensation. Here's the issue. And we're going to really get into this matter now, because this is where all this is now coming to a head. Okay? With this particular matter right here. Black South Africans for the land. Notice the subtle absurdity here. That Afrikaners, the Europeans, had given serious thought to compensating black South Africans for the land they stole. The South African measure had been in the pipeline for some time, although few paid much attention. Zimbabwe, which was once called Rhodesia, named after the butcher Cecil Rhodes, who conquested that land, the English settler Cecil Rhodes, actually renamed the whole country, an African continent, Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. Talk about audacity, right? Zimbabwe had taken the foolish step of reclaiming land from white farmers that did not belong to the latter. Zimbabweans understood that the British settlers had not imported it from Britain. You can't import land from nowhere. That's something that they ain't growing nowhere. Land is land. And the indigenous have a claim and a right to that land that the settlers do not. Just because you have come with guns and cannons and military force does not mean this land belongs to you. It don't even belong to us like that. We just happen to be here to now manage and take care of the land and take care of ourselves and those who are on the land with us. That's the mindset of indigenous people. Foolish, because as a result, Zimbabwe was to suffer sanctions that drove their economy to near total ruin. Their hyperinflation was ridiculous. It was like 10 trillion Zimbabwean dollars to $1 US. It is so ridiculous, the hyperinflation that took place in Zimbabwe, just because they wanted to resist colonial rule and influence. We want our own country. We want our own land. So you know what? We're not going to trade with y'all. We're going to block people bringing stuff to y'all. Can't do nothing with Zimbabwe. So they suffered as a result of wanting to be a free country. Beyond that, any moves to push for divestment against the egregious Zionist policy is being criminalized in increasing numbers of the states of the Union. Zimbabweans were being punished for claiming what was rightfully theirs, while Israel is compensated for what is expropriated. The idea that Zimbabweans could demand entitlements to lush farms in the English countryside, whatever the pretext, would be met with scorn and laughter, but that humor was lost on white settlers convinced that the lands they appropriated in the Dark Continent and other lands were theirs by right, just as British settlers had appropriated rich farmlands in Kenya and named them the White Highlands. Do you see the absolute absurdity and conundrum, like this article talks about, the conundrums that exist over these land issues? Now, the reason this is so important, land is the basis of what? Can someone type in the box, land is the basis of what? Little do the majority of the world know that the Zim is on the move. Say a lot. Yeah, economy, it's the basis of economy, but land is bigger than that. There it is, Moray Shebaniah. Freedom and liberation, sovereignty, independence. Land is the basis of one's sovereignty. If you have no land, you have no sovereignty. You have no freedom. You have no independence. You have no life. Truly, it has no value. You have no, exactly. Those are all intrinsic to possession of land. And I mean that in the purest sense. I don't mean that in the capitalist sense of possessing land. I mean that in a collectivist sense. Like, our sovereignty is tied up in our collective management of the resources that are found within the land. So this is what is essential for us to understand. So still, and despite the initial setbacks admitted by former President Robert Mugabe, 10 years on, there are signs of recovery, with corn production now higher than at any time of white ownership of Zimbabwe farmlands, as is the production of other crops. They're more fruitful in their own land. All said, there is a convergence of histories of Western settler, colonial, and imperial expansion, massive land thefts, and the social and economic isolation of natives. These actions would reflect, in fact, apartheid-like scenarios, but this term has been dropped and restricted to South Africa and Israel. Between 1776 and the present, in the U.S. alone, an astounding 1.5 billion acres was seized from native inhabitants. This represents a landmass about 25 times the size of the United Kingdom, not counting figures in Canada, South America, Australia, and New Zealand, where they wiped out an entire people. There's no more Tasmanians in New Zealand. The entire race of the Tasmanian people is now null and void. There is not one Tasmanian left on earth. If you knew that, type in a 1. If you did not know that, type in a 0. This is the cruelty of this people. Their desire and lust for land and power was so great that they exterminated an entire people. There are no Tasmanians on earth anymore. I don't even believe there are any Arawaks on earth anymore. Are there any Mayans or Aztecs left? I don't know. They're wiping out these peoples. That is a part of the plan of Western domination. Dehumanize, denigrate, destroy. That sounds kind of like the devil, if you ask me. So the combined land area of the Americas alone makes up 8% of the total surface area of the planet, and over 28% of the planet's land area. Australia accounts for a cool 5% of the Earth's land area. The Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia was emptied of its inhabitants to make way for an American military base that is chicken feed by comparison. Africa represented a different set of challenges. Much of its terrain possessed natural barriers to European settler appropriation, malaria, and sleeping sickness. But lands that supported intensive farming practice in as far-flung places as Kenya, Algeria, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, or what we know as Mana Matapa, was stolen with the ensuing anti-colonial struggles, particularly vicious in Algeria, where the French were, and Kenya, where the British were as well, estimating, well, Algeria had 2 million dead, and Kenya had 11,000 to 90,000 casualties, subsequently halting and reversing such thefts. Since the land redistribution announcement for Pretoria, white kinship passions seem to be gathering momentum. Listen to that. White kinship passions seem to be gathering momentum since the land redistribution announcement for Pretoria. And we got an article that's going to really address that coming up shortly. A no online petition calls on Trump to take the steps necessary to initiate an emergency immigration plan allowing white Boers to come to the United States. Australia has already opened up her doors. Come on to Australia. We got you. Any white farmer that's being harassed or told to get off the land, you can come to Australia. That's the connections that they have in their institution and in their system. What connections do we have? When our ancestors were suffering, where was Africa at telling us, you know what, we got you. If you're seeking asylum or refuge, come on, we got you. Where's that even now with all the displacement that's taking place in Africa? Why are we being told you got to get out of Israel? Where the African countries are saying, we'll take you, come on in. These are the things that we need to have in place as a people. Very interesting, though. Very interesting. So Boers may reside in a bunghole continent, but their skin color still entitles them to privileges denied others devastated by American wars of aggression. Elsewhere, a member of the European Parliament, Janice Atkinson, recently wrote to British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, urging him to mediate with South African officials following the National Assembly's passing of a motion to investigate land expropriation without compensation. Especially, that's the whole thing. You're not going to compensate us. We're not going to get any money. Oh no, woe is us. If we don't get money, if they don't get money, excuse me, then that's the end of their whole work, for real. She said she was a regular visitor to South Africa and had followed the country's troubled history for years. To this racist South Africa's troubled history began with the long overdue land reforms, not with decades-long racism and dispossession. Right? That's the whole crazy thing about it. That's like what many of these Europeans today are blind to. Not that you all went down there like King Leopold and Cecil Rhodes and decimated, and also Germany and Namibia and decimated and committed genocide against these indigenous peoples. But now that they're rising up and saying we want our land back, now we're racist, now we're violent, for real. Like there's no acknowledgement of the crimes against humanity that you carried out historically. But all of a sudden, here we come on. They're violent. Heck, I mean, it's just such. It's so partial. It's so partial in how history is being made to be perceived through the outlets of media that are present today, because it's ran by the devils that went about destroying things. So this is why we need our own outlets. Okay, and I'm not saying all Europeans are devils. I'm not saying all Africans are angels. But that's what it's about, Dawid. It's about justice. It's about truth. That's what this comes down to. Continuing on. Besides, Zionist Israel's ongoing theft of Palestinian lands would scarcely justify such lofty mediation efforts. A seemingly progressive site as the UN's Review had an uncommonly reactionary piece on this issue, whose concluding remarks speak mountains about kinship concerns trumping historical injustices and measures to redress them. Most damningly, the country's constitution has a clause devoted to limitation rights. Apparently, the constitutional scholars who compiled the document saw no need to protect the rights of minorities that had not been victims of past discrimination. Whatever happened to redressing balances for the overwhelming majority in place of continuing the untenable status quo initiated by an uninvited usurper? Black kinship sentiments were not about to be upended on the issue of land reform. Participants of the summit of the non-alignment movement held in Tanzania in 2003 gave unqualified political support to the Mugabe regime at virtually the same time that Australia, Britain, and the US, whereas Canada, Israel, and New Zealand, when you need them, were successfully pushing for the renewal and extension of smart sanctions against Mugabe and his cronies. According to such an approach, Racial solidarity would be the driving force. Identity politics would be the driving force behind policy stances of African leaders, including Thabo Mbeki, towards the Zimbabwe crisis. But racial solidarity initiated by black Africans would be an aberration. Racial narratives and the refashioning of realities have been proceeding unchallenged from Europeans for so long that the idea that Africans and others can possess similar narratives has been totally lost on them. About a year and a half ago, in this room, there were 3 different presentations that were given about identity politics and the viability of said politics, of identity politics, in the pursuit of our liberation. And I'm not saying this as an exclusive sense, but it should be a nucleus that would factor into the way we go about achieving and accomplishing our liberation through identity politics. All right? Now, I want to get to my next article. And this next article, y'all going to be like, oh my goodness, like this is that deep. Because this is going to really frame everything for you as relates to what this is really about. And we'll see how this unfolds with this particular article here. This is one of the initiating measures that has contributed to the South African conundrum and dilemma that we're facing today. This comes to us from Cape Town News. When you get this article, give us a 4. Give me a 4. It's called Day Israelites Were Mowed Down. The Day Israelites Were Mowed Down. This is written by Dougie Oakes. He wrote this on the 29th of June in 2016. This is a very, very significant article. This is about South Africa. This ain't in Israel, people. This is about South Africa. All right? Cape Town News told our Rabbi for your acknowledgement of the 4. In this picture here, the caption says, Israelite dead before their burial in one of the 3 mass graves because they chose the plan of God. This is what this is talking about. Listen to this article. This is profound. We're going to see some very interesting connections and a powerful nexus in this article that is going to be like, oh my goodness. Because it's all connected to the United States, to Israel, to South Africa. And this is what I'm intending to show today. Now, let me kind of just say some things that I want to do. What I want to do with this particular offering here is show, and I told you this is prophetic. I want to show you all the nexus that exists between those 3 particular countries, the United States, South Africa, and Israel. They're all united together, both authentically and also in a counterfeit sense, because the true children of Israel have been found in those 3 lands. Conversely speaking, the antagonists, the enemies, the oppressors, the counterfeit has also been found in those 3 lands as well. So we're going to see how this is all playing out on the geopolitical chessboard. All right? So look at this. 30 minutes. 30 minutes was all it took for a force of close to 1,000 white policemen armed with machine guns to crush an act of civil disobedience led by an African prophet named Enoch Mjijima and several hundreds of his followers whose weapons were an assortment of sticks and stones, assegais, and similar weapons. It happened on May 24th, 1921. This happened in 1921. And the countdown to this tragic loss of life began when heavily armed police started marching towards Ntabalenga, the mountain of the rising sun, about 25 kilometers from Queenstown in the Eastern Cape. Mjijima and his followers, known as Israelites, they believed and understood and knew that they were Israelites in South Africa. They believed that the end of the world was imminent, and they had therefore decided to gather at Ntabalenga to wait for it. But the police were not interested in the beliefs of the Israelites. Does this sound anything familiar to today? I mean, these things are just replaying out in history. The police were not interested in the beliefs of the Israelites, but now we got Project Megiddo. Because these people here, man, they got something about them. We're going to see what this article is going to say about these Israelites. All they wanted to do was to ensure that Mjijima and his followers moved off land they believed did not belong to them. This is about land, people. This is about indigenous rights. This is about inheritance. Now, I say this because what we have to understand is that Israel's, particularly Israel's roots are found in Monomatapa. What do you mean, Moray? Can someone tell me, how is Israel's roots tied to Monomatapa, to South Africa? How does Israel have a connection? How does Israel's roots go back to Monomatapa? Does anybody know? If you know, type in a 1. If you do not know, type in a 0. The Limba, they return back, right? But I'm talking about the roots of Israel. Who were the first people in the Levant area? What were they called? Who were the first to domesticate animals and to do wheat in the... Okay, so the Natufians. The Natufians are what type of people? They're Bantu. So the Bantu come from Monomatapa. So what we have to understand as Israelites, we come from the Natufian branch of humanity, which is a Bantu branch of humanity, which goes all the way back to Monomatapa, or South Africa. So this is Israel's connection to this. And these people reclaimed their identity. They understood who they were. But look at the route that they take to get back to this. This is a powerful article. Listen to this. So they stressed that they did not want a fight, the Israelites did. But if they were drawn to confrontation, they would not hesitate to use their weapons. We don't want a fight. Mjijima had an interesting upbringing. His father, Jonah, right? Listen to their names. Yona Maiskiso Mjijima, a member of the Hrubi clan, grew up at the foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains before being forced to flee during a period of upheaval known as the Mfekene, during the first few decades of the 19th century. Mjijima the Elder was a member of the Hlubi clan, Hlubi group, which found its way to the Eastern Cape, where they sought the protection of the Galecher Khosa. That's some click language, I can't do those clicks yet. In their new surroundings, they became known as Mfingu, which in the dialect of the region translated as "we are wanderers who seek help." Listen to that. I mean, if that's not Israel in exile, I don't know what it is, right? The Glaklika Zohausa referred to them by this name because they had arrived in the Eastern Cape bearing all the signs of people who had fled in a great hurry. That sounds like Exodus, don't it? They carried hardly anything with them. That sounds just like the fleeing from Mitzrayim. You see how Moriam 70 was talking about these shadows, these portents, these signs that are pointing to things that are also to be picked up by the descendants. All this is relative to that. The Glaklika proved to be generous hosts, providing them with dairy cattle and grain until such time that they were able to sustain themselves. But the new arrivals were ambitious, overly so, and quickly displayed a preparedness to stab their hosts in the back if this would mean getting more land and resources for themselves. Thus in 1834-35, when the Glaklika Hausa fought the British and the British offered the Mfingu to land to fight on their side, the Mfingu were quick to agree, to their chagrin. Messiah, not right now. And the British for once kept their word after the cessation of hostilities. They settled thousands of Mfingu on prime land between the Fish and Kisakama rivers. In their new settlements, they became prime targets for Wesleyan missionaries eager to introduce them to the wonders of Christianity, such as churches, European clothes, and brick houses with tin roofs. In 1856, Jonas Njijima settled his family at Bolhoek, close to the Black K River, and by all accounts initially became a very wealthy person. But in a land where catastrophe could occur quickly, and where natural disasters such as drought and animal disease such as rinderpest could quickly sweep across a region, wealth could be wiped out in weeks. When poverty struck, those affected by it were prepared to believe anything. Church leaders and so-called prophets found ready audiences among the now wretched of the earth. In the early years of the 20th century, Jonas Njijima's son, Enoch, had a burgeoning reputation as a lay priest in the Wesleyan Methodist Church. His influence spread even wider when he became an independent evangelist. Then on April 19, 1907, his life changed completely. He had a vision. An angel said to him, I'm sending you to people who see clearly today, but nothing tomorrow. If you do not carry out this mission, I will take all the sins of the people and hold you accountable. I have sent you to these people because I am worried that although they worship me, they are not honest in their worship of me. I want you to worship me to your old traditions. Listen to this. One of Mjijima's strongest messages all around the area was that the world was about to end. He said Elohim, or God, was angry with humanity and that people everywhere should return to paying homage to Old Testament teachings. What was he pointing the people back to? What was he pointing the people back to? One word. What was he pointing the people back to? One word. Torah. Exactly. He was pointing the people back to Torah. This is in South Africa in 1912, 1907, the early 20th century. So there was awakening that was taking place in Africa of who they were. And we're going to see something very interesting with this next paragraph. Listen to this. Towards the end of 1912, he predicted that the world would end on Christmas Day. But even though nothing happened, his followers, now he should have, kind of been really dealt with for that. But check this out, though. His followers continued to hang on to every word he spoke. By then, Mjijima was on an unstoppable path. He quit the Wesleyans and decided instead to throw in his lot with a small black-run church from the U.S., the Church of God and Saints of Christ. Who was the founder of the Church of God and Saints of Christ? Can someone type in the text box, who's the founder of the Church of God and Saints of Christ? Now check this is the connection and the nexus that's so deep to this. I talked about the nexus between the U.S. Thank you. William Saunders Crowdy. From Oklahoma, lived in Lawrence, Kansas, and went all across the world, finally settling in Philadelphia. Bishop Crowdy is the founder, an Israelite who said, we are the children of Israel. So when they're talking about these people here are Israelites, they weren't saying this haphazardly or metaphorically or allegorically. No, they're saying this is who we are, even in South Africa. 1907, people. It was known. It was known. It was well known that we were in South Africa, that we were in the United States. And don't think the European didn't know that, because they knew this as well. Continuing on, he continued to have visions, and much to the horror of his partner church in the U.S., which believed in peace, not war, one of his visions seemed to suggest a race war between white and black. Now look at what's taking place in South Africa. Look at what's taking place in the United States. Look at what's taking place even in Israel, with the refugees coming from different countries in Africa, and the uproar that it's caused in the land of Israel, the uproars that are taking place in the United States, the uproars that are taking place in South Africa. You think this is happenstance and coincidence? Expelled by the Americans, he started his own group in South Africa with those who chose to remain with him. They became known as Israelites. Hands down, they became known as Israelites. In 1919, Mjijima predicted that the world would end in 1920. It resulted in about 3,000 followers from all over South Africa, or Matapa, arriving at Ntabalenga, where they proceeded to squat on the land. This is where the land issue almost starts, with Israel saying, look, this is our land. They were accused of erecting a tabernacle and some huts on the property without registering these with the authorities or paying tax. You hear that? To settlers, to invaders, to colonizers, to foreigners in their land. Talking about I got to register with you and pay tax now? Come on, man. As the new arrivals began erecting more dwellings, white officials began accusing him of building on British property. Really? This is British property? How that? But he ignored instructions to remove the houses. There was little Israelites could do either. On arrival at the village, they had been told to get rid of all their worldly possessions. If they were forced to leave, it would be with nothing. On December 7 and 8, 1920, the senior magistrate of Queenstown, E.C.A. Welsh, arrived at Ntabalenga with 100 police officers. They set up camp about a half a kilometer from the Israelites. Excuse me. Panic began sweeping through the ranks of the white townspeople, and Israelites began fearing an attack by the heavily armed police of being arrested if they left the village. And in the meantime, a farmer shot 2 Israelites foraging for food on his farm. Smuts eventually decided to send a team of negotiators to speak with the Israelites. On May 20, 993 policemen and 35 officers from various offices gathered in Queenstown to prepare to expel the Israelites. The Israelites in turn did some preparations of their own. Listen to this. They marched and trained every afternoon before killing an ox and dipping the tips of their spears into its blood. They were preparing, right? Now, I'm not saying that it's all about conflict, but everything is about preparation. It's the whole principle of this matter here, preparation. On May 21, Mjijima was given an ultimatum. He was told to ensure that all illegal squatters left the area and that all illegal houses had to be dismantled. On May 23, 1921, the police, armed with machine guns, a cannon, and artillery, moved in. About 500 Israelites waited for them. Their defiant message was, "We will not allow you to scatter our people from Nantabalanga. We will not allow you to burn our huts, and we will not allow you to arrest the 2 men you wish to." It was not clear how the battle started, but some reports say it may have begun after a shot was fired by accident. Selah, very interesting. Soon afterwards, the Israelites launched an attack, and the police were given the order to respond. One of the policemen, Colonel Woon, listen to this, said the Israelites were the most determined and fanatical I had ever experienced, and it was only by shooting them down that the attack could have ever stopped. There's an article I wrote a while ago called The Fires of Shem, and it speaks about the spirit of resistance, of righteous resistance that our ancestors and our present day Israelites have always offered to the face of injustice and oppression. You can take the Maccabees. You can take Mashiach Yahushua. You can take Amos. You can take even Yonah after he came to his senses. You can take Gabriel Prosser. You can take Denmark Vesey. You can take Nat Turner. You can take Harriet Tubman. You can take Frederick Douglass. You can take all these people who knew who they were and understand the determination and fanatical zeal for righteousness and justice that our ancestors have always possessed because of what spirit Yah has placed within us. You can always contextualize that to the point that they're willing to lay their life down. No greater love on earth is for one to lay their life down for their friend. This is what Mashiach told us. So you can see the suffering servant throughout, the motif of the suffering servant throughout our experience. Yes, indeed. So many who took a stand for righteousness in Yah. We have so many. You can read the whole chapter of Hebrews 11 and see all those who withstood death, torture, to stand on the right side of history. They said the only way that we could overcome them was by shooting them down, that the attack could have been stopped. About 200 people were killed, more than 100 wounded, and 141 arrested, including Enoch Mjijima and his sons. On November 1921, 141 Israelites were charged with violent and forcible conduct against the authorities of the state, which was all color of law. All were found guilty. Mjijima and his older brother, Charles and Gilbert Matshoba, were sentenced to 6 years hard labor at De Beers, not to mention those devils, the jewelers, right? The De Beers convict station in Kimberley. Most of the others were sentenced to prison terms of between 12 and 18 months. If you knew that there were Israelites, besides the Limba in South Africa, such as Enoch and Mjijima and his group of followers, type in a 1. If you did not know this, because I didn't know this prior to reading this, type in a 0. This is powerful to me. I know, Elder, you talked about Nelson Mandela mentioning them in his book. That's powerful. But this is history we need to know. This is vital information. This connects dots that we have no clue that is taking place with the present situation underway right now in South Africa. This is at root. And this is what we need to move with an understanding. And I want to present another article that's very, very interesting in light of this here. IMEU. When you access this next article I'm about to send it twice. Give me a 4. This is called an overview. Apartheid, South Africa, and Israel. This is just some key points.
Can I have some water?
Y'all, please give me one moment. Just give me one moment. If I can be heard, give me a 4 again, please.
Sorry, you eat all the M&Ms. No, you're eating all of it. You ate all the M&Ms. Eat all of it. You're not just...
If I can be heard, give me a 4. Be right back. Since this is not working. Pause this. Alright, so I'm going to put this article back in here for you all to access. This is called, again, an overview. Apartheid, South Africa, and Israel. When you access this article, give me a 1. When you access this article, give me a 1. This is a very interesting nexus or connection. Toda Rabbah. This was written on December 9th, 2013 by the IMEU staff. It says Israel political support for apartheid South Africa. Listen to this. The state of Israel was created in 1948. Happens to be the exact same year that the racist apartheid regime was implemented in South Africa. So here's the question. What's the connection there? That the fact that Israel established the Zionist state in 1948, but also apartheid was established in South Africa that same year. The same people, exactly, on both sides of the coin. You got the indigenous Israelites in South Africa who are being oppressed in their own land in South Africa.
This is what my top charger looks like.
And you're also dealing with the oppression of Israel in the Promised Land by the same people, the same Zionist people. So you can see that there was a concerted effort. And you know what was going on with us in 1948. Jim Crow was alive and well. Apartheid. So they were making this a global plan. This was not something that was isolated to one particular country. Messiah, sit down, please. This was a global plan that was being initiated with the intent of, more than likely, exterminating these people. Not just oppressing, but exterminating these people. Dram Afridar. Very interesting. Expound. You have a link for who Dram Afridar is? I mean, that's something I can look up right quick. Dram Afridar. South Africa? Okay. Interesting. I know South Africa is Mana Matapa, personally. Some even call it Azania, but that's still a Greek name for it. But Mana Matapa is the indigenous name of that particular region. But again, the state of Israel was created in 1948, the same year that the racist apartheid regime was implemented in South Africa. That is not coincidence, people. In the 60s, a political and military alliance developed between the two countries, deepening following Israel's occupation of the Palestinian West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and the Syrian Golan Heights in the June 1967 war. Listen to this here. In the 70s, Israel's government under Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin forged close ties with South Africa's apartheid regime. One of the architects of this alliance was then Defense Minister and current President Shimon Peres. While Peres frequently condemned apartheid publicly, behind the scenes he was instrumental in creating an alliance that helped keep the apartheid regime afloat, while the rest of the world was increasingly turning against it in revulsion at its racist policies. Excuse me. In November 1974, following a secret visit to Pretoria, Peres wrote to South African officials praising the vitally important link he had helped establish between the two countries, and highlighting that his cooperation is based not only on common interests and on the determination to resist equally our enemies. Who do you think their enemies were? Who were their enemies? Why were they so zealous about keeping this system in place in the United States in South Africa, or Matapa, and in Israel. Why were they so intent on that? Who were their enemies? Sit down, please, son. Who were their enemies? Which is who? Who are we? Who are we? In light to them, why are they so intent on opposing us? Nah, that's exactly. We are Israel. We know that. I mean, it's so deep because when you see this and you understand it, this is like these confederated nations of Psalm 83. So this is so powerful. This to me, this is essential consciousness to have in terms of understanding this history. Okay. So their cooperation is based not only on the common interest and on the determination to resist equally our enemies, but also on the unshakable foundations of our common hatred of injustice and our refusal to submit to it. In 1975, a joint secretariat for political and psychological warfare, listen to that, a joint secretariat for political and psychological warfare was created to facilitate the apartheid South Africa-Israel alliance, including propaganda and psychological warfare, part of a $100 million South African propaganda campaign to rehabilitate the country's image internationally. According to a report from NBC News, quote, under terms of the agreement championed by Perez, then defense minister, and Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister, Israel would help South Africa burnish its international reputation. South Africa would supply the money, with each country appointing a secretary to look after its interests, end quote. A 76 South African prime minister, John Vorster, listen to this devil, who was imprisoned by the British during World War II for pro-Nazi activities, was given a red carpet welcome in Israel. What kind of sense does that make? You're a Nazi and supporting Nazis and engaged in Nazi activities, but you're getting a red welcome carpet to Israel. But see, when you understand Zionism at its root, then you understand its nexus to Nazism, and that they're the ZI of the Nazis. Because before that, they were just the National Socialist Democratic Party, and it was the symbols was just the NA. But that ZI comes in, according to Eustace Mullins, not just my opinion, the research of Eustace Mullins, to show that there was secular Jewish collusion. And the Jews that they did exterminate were the religious Jews, those who were Torah-based, those Jews who oppose Zionism. You know there's Jews who oppose Zionism, don't you? Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionists. They oppose, they're Jews who oppose Zionism because they understand Torah. And these are Ashkenazic Jews. But that's not talked about that much. So, at a state dinner, Prime Minister Rabin praised Vorster for creating a prosperous atmosphere of cooperation between their two countries. Regarding the affinity between the two regimes, Israeli Army Chief of Staff General Raphael Eitan, who would go on to serve as Agricultural and Environment Minister and as Deputy Prime Minister during Benjamin Netanyahu's first term as Prime Minister from 96 to 99, explained that blacks in South Africa want to gain control over the white minority just like the Arabs here want to gain control over us. And we, like the white minority in South Africa, must act to prevent them from taking over. End quote. While Israel and South Africa's apartheid regime worked closely together, the African National Congress, under Nelson Mandela, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, under Yasser Arafat, also developed close ties in their anti-colonial struggles. An outspoken supporter of Palestinian rights, in 1997, Mandela declared, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." Shortly after being released from prison in 1990, Mandela remarked that, quote, "The people of South Africa will never forget the support of the state of Israel to the apartheid regime." I'm going to leave that article there. You can go back and read that. I want to get into a little more intricacy of it. But this article here is lengthy. I'm not going to get into the entire article, but I want to present some very vital information from this particular article from The Guardian. So when you access this article from The Guardian, it's entitled Brothers in Arms, Israel's Secret Pact with Pretoria. Give me a 4.
Yeah, but you got any ice cream sandwiches?
No. You need to eat breakfast first.
What did we do?
Chex Mix is not breakfast.
I'm hungry.
Well, Mo, can you get him some cereal? Brothers in Arms, Israel's Secret Pact with Pretoria. So during the Second World War, the future South African Prime Minister John Vorster, who we just mentioned in the previous article, was interned as a Nazi sympathizer. 3 decades later, he was being feted in Jerusalem. In the second part of his remarkable special report, Chris McGrill investigates the clandestine alliance between Israel and the apartheid regime, cemented with the ultimate gift of friendship, atomic bomb technology. Mosiah. Can you hear me, Mo? Tapping.
Yeah, no.
Mo, stop kicking him.
Sorry. What was that?
I told you the tapping.
You did.
I know, but don't kick him. I asked you to get him some cereal, please.
You did?
Yes. Excuse me.
So you need to tap.
So, several years ago in Johannesburg, I met a Jewish woman whose mother and sister were murdered in Auschwitz. After their deaths, she was forced into a gas chamber, but by some miracle, that bout of killing was called off. Vera Reitzer survived the extermination camp, married soon after the war, and moved to South Africa. Reitzer joined the apartheid nationalist party. Look at that. That's just insane. Like, you go from dealing with oppression, you being oppressed, to now going to being an oppressor. And this is what I want to say about that. And this is essential for us to understand. We cannot proceed to deal with our enemies in the same fashion that our enemies have dealt with us. We have to be just and righteous. We have to move beyond hate. And I don't know if any of you all have seen the movie or read the book, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. But man, I can't think of the brother's name. You have to turn that down, son. The brother, the protagonist of the book, was like, it takes more than hate to overcome our enemies. Because if we just fuel hate, we're going to be just like our enemies and turn around and oppress them. And it's not about oppression. It's about justice. And that's what we have to understand. So, after joining the party in the early 50s, at about the time that the new Prime Minister, D.F. Malan, was introducing legislation reminiscent of Hitler's Nuremberg laws against Jews, the Population Registration Act that classified South Africans according to race. That's why you had Bantu Steve Biko. They identified him as of the Bantu tribe, so they called him Bantu Steve Biko. Legislation that forbade sex and marriage across the color line, and laws barring black people from... He don't want that cereal. You want that cereal? You want Reese's? You want that one? For many jobs. Thank you, Mo. Reitzer saw no contradiction in surviving the Holocaust, only to sign up for a system that was disturbingly reminiscent in its underpinning philosophy, if not in the scale of its crimes, as the one she had outlived. She vigorously defended apartheid and as a necessary bulwark against black domination and the communism that engulfed her negative Yugoslavia. Reitzer let slip that she thought Africans inferior to other human beings and not entitled to be treated as equals. I asked if Hitler hadn't said the same thing about her as a Jew. She called a halt to the conversation. Reitzer was unusual among Jewish South Africans in her open enthusiasm for apartheid and for her membership for the NP. I think that was actually the norm, if you ask me. But she was an accepted member of the Jewish community of Johannesburg, working for the Holocaust Survivors Association, while Jews who fought the system were frequently ostracized by their own community. Many Israelis recoil at suggestions that their country, risen from the ashes of genocide and built on Jewish ideals, could be compared to a racist regime. Now, if you understand Theodore Herzl, and you understand Lord Balfour, And you understand the Rothschilds. Like this DC congressman who recently came out about the Rothschilds and got castigated quickly for his statement. But when you look at history and you see what has been done, and you understand the delineation between the secular so-called Ashkenazic Jew, those of Gomer, those of Ashkenaz, and you understand those who truly have Torah in their heart, then you understand what's being said right here. So for the years of the bulk of South Africa's Jews, they not only failed to challenge the apartheid system, but benefited and thrived under its protection, even if some of their number figured prominently in the liberation movements. In time, Israeli governments too set aside objections to a regime whose leaders had once been admirers of Adolf Hitler. Within 3 decades of its birth, Israel's self-proclaimed purity of arms, what it describes as the moral superiority of its soldiers, was secretly sacrificed as the fate of the Jewish state became so intertwined with South Africa that the Israeli security establishment came to believe the relationship saved the Jewish state. Afrikaner anti-Semitism. Apartheid sought to segregate every aspect of life from the workplace to the bedroom, even though whites in practice were dependent on black people as a workforce and servants. Isn't this always the case? Segregation evolved into separate development, and thus Bantustans, the 5 nominally independent homelands where millions of black people were dumped under the rule of despots beholden to Pretoria. While the Nationalist Party government first gained power in Pretoria in 1948, the Jews of South Africa, the bulk of them descendants of refugees from 19th century pogroms in Lithuania and Latvia, had reason to be worried. They came there seeking refuge. Now here it is in 2018, we have Africans seeking refuge in these European-dominated lands, not finding any rest. But here it is, you come to African land, take over it, and then say you can't do anything here. So where can we go? Where can we go then? What is possible for us to experience? And see, a lot of that falls on us at the same time. A lot of that falls in our hands, because here's the thing. If we were truly in covenant with Yah, none of this would even be the issue. If we were in covenant with Yah, none of this would even be the issue. If you agree with that statement, give me a 1. If you do not agree with that statement, give me a 0. That's the essential nature of this matter. The reason why this is all the way it is because we're out of order. Once we return to our order, once we return to Yah, all this will eventually be cleared up. I mean, this article goes on and on and on. This is a report. This is a research article. This is huge. But I wanted to show you that there is a nexus between the United States government, between the South African Praetorian government, between the Tel Aviv Israeli government and the individuals who are running the government of those said countries are intent to suppress, oppress, depress, and even if possible exterminate those who are subjected to it, particularly the Israelites. All right. Now let's get into what's taking place presently. I'm gonna leave off on that article. Eat right, please. This next article comes to us from Pan Bazooka News. Oh, come on. Let's see what's happening. Maybe not. 80. Okay, I see it right there. It's still not working. Give me 1 second, I'm sorry. Let's see what the problem is. Besides, stop slurping. It's still not going. What is it? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. M70, I'm gonna send this article to you because it's not coming up for me for some reason. If you don't mind. I can go upstairs because I'm on the microphone. Yeah, I'll go upstairs.
But I can't come upstairs with you.
You gotta be quiet. Let me send you this M70. For some reason, it's not coming through with me. Can you just post that in there for me? I'm gonna make a quick transition, so you all please excuse me. Make a quick run.
Where are you going?
Upstairs, what's up?
Why I wanted to lower you.
When you get done eating. Just give me one moment, please. Just re-situate. So we can actually get back in 1 second. All right. Told her about more M70. Had some problems getting that in there. And so, this is called Agrarian Reform is Needed to Slay Apartheid's Land Demons. So we read of what was taking place with apartheid in that last article somewhat. And we can see how the indigenous people were completely disenfranchised from their land and their livelihoods. So this article by Aisha Bahadur, written on March 9th, presents some counterclaims to how about going about this. So she says that, well, when you access this, please give me a 4 first. Let me do that. Let me get you all to give me a 4 when you access this article. Told about Morris Sheb. And I want to welcome any and all who recently entered into the room. Hebrew Vision, where Yah is Elohim. And Yahushua is Mashiach. Alright, so the controversial announcement by the African National Congress that land will be expropriated without compensation has raised contentions on land reform in South Africa. Land is symbolic of the discontent at post-apartheid transformation, but it is real agrarian reform to improve income and livelihoods that is desperately needed for the black majority that are living below the poverty line. The security of land tenure of black South Africans remains largely unaddressed since 1994, with insufficient progress on land restitution and redistribution of less than a third of the target 26 million hectares in 24 years since democracy. This is, of course, when Mandela came out to restore the order to the indigenous people. But we know, it's so interesting with Mandela, and I'm not speaking bad of his legacy, but after he got out, there were some things that he did that were very suspect, such as becoming a knight of Malta. Like, what's your connection to becoming a knight of Malta? Like, why would you go into that route? You know, very interesting. So, continuing on with this article, though. If land reform is to address the challenges of disenfranchisement, underemployment, poverty, and inequality, then the political leadership and will needs to be focused on overhauling state support for agricultural development that targets the poor. Addressing South Africa's past is essential to agrarian reform. And this is what's not being done by many of these European outlets today. They're just talking about the present phenomenon as if the Europeans had always been there and didn't take the land by violence and bloodshed. Like, really? Let's understand the development of what is now. So even before apartheid was introduced in 1948, which we discussed, it was also in tandem with the establishment of the Zionist State of Israel. The state secured white commercial interests, including land for agriculture. The Land Act of 1913 allocated only about 7% of arable land to blacks. So 93% belongs to the European minority? In 1936, the Natives Trust and Land Act increased arable land to blacks to a potential 13%, but it also formalized the separation of white and black rural areas and put in place restrictions on blacks living in white areas. Keep in mind, in the continent of Africa, in the country, in the region of Monomatapa. Really? Mind-blowing. See, this is what Dr. John Henry Clarke said. John Henry Clarke said colonialism is such a monster, but it's done the same thing to those inside of the continent and those outside of the continent. Inside the continent, it's removed the land from the people. Those who've been displaced have been removed from the land, but it's gone about doing the same exact principle thing in terms of separating people from land and from cultural consciousness. They not only colonize land, they colonize information. These people proclaiming to be Israelites, we gotta know that. We gotta kill this. So that's huge. So these laws created a huge reservoir of cheap African labor as pressure on land could not sustain traditional agrarian lives. Let me see. Further pressure was exerted with the Group Areas Act of 1950, curbing movements, and the Bantu Authorities Act of 1951, which pushed blacks into homelands self-governed by ethnic groups recognized by the apartheid state. And this is what gave rise to the issue in Rwanda. When you had groups that were pushed back into homelands that were self-governed by these ethnic groups, they caused these divisions, that gave rise to the Rwandan genocide. A system referred to as separate development under South African Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd dominated from 1958, but this amounted to the deliberate neglect driving deprivation and poverty in the homelands, which has entrenched these as the legacy of apartheid. Today, almost a third of South Africa's population lives in the former homelands that are characterized as areas of low economic activity with little economic potential and high numbers of people living in poverty. Land in these regions is owned by the state but governed under traditional tenure arrangements to make land available for use to households predominantly for small-scale subsistence farming regions using labor-intensive traditional production techniques. In comparison, apartheid's legacy for former white farm areas has created commercial, large-scale agricultural regions held by white capital. For 8 decades before democracy, the South African government passed legislation and created institutional capacity to support the development of white farmers. The Land Bank of South Africa, established in 1912, provided subsidized financial services and credit to white farmers, and the Agricultural Credit Board provided credit to white farmers who did not qualify for borrowing from the Land Bank. Now here's my question. There may be white farmers, but who's working the farm? Who's working the agriculture? Who's working the crops? Who's the labor for the crops of these white farm lands? Who's the labor? That should be apparent. Exactly. The Africans are the labor. They just don't profit from it. They don't get the benefits and the rewards of being the farmers of the land. Now they're working for those who have the credit that the government has provided for to own the land that they stole. But here it is that we can't even work our own land. We got 13% of the land that we had 100% of prior to any European foot stepping on that continent. What? So financial services to farmers were curtailed under liberalization that followed democracy. Subsidies were cut, and the Agricultural Credit Board was closed down on the recommendation of the Strauss Commission in 1996. The Commission's recommendation that the Land Bank should receive grants from the National Treasury to enable it to expand its developmental mandate to small farmers was never implemented. Lending by the Land Bank itself was also curtailed. Farmers had to borrow from commercial banks at decidedly less favorable interest rates. This created an unfavorable environment for the development of black farmers in the post-apartheid era, even more so for small-scale black farmers. So the apartheid policy of separate development resulted in a dual system of state-supported services in agriculture that existed up to 1994. One institute provided agricultural extension services to white farmers, while another served farmers in the homelands. The former was made up of a relatively small number of well-qualified staff, often university graduates, while the latter consisted of large numbers of less qualified staff. The separate agricultural support services for white and black farmers were not brought together successfully and deteriorated in the decade after democracy. Critical staff vacancies led to the Agricultural Extension Officer Recovery Plan by the Department of Agriculture and funded by the National Treasury, aiming to raise the number of extension officers from 2,000 to 5,000. Today, the linkages and coordination between the parasols, science councils, higher education and development institutions, and the private sector that make up South Africa's national agricultural research systems remain weak. I'm going to end off there. You can read the rest of this article here, but you can see what has been left after apartheid. Typically, when colonialism leaves, when the colonial powers are transitioning to neo-colonial powers, the vestiges of that system remain. And they find puppets from within the rank and file of African people to continue to carry out the interests of the government in power, or the system in power, the colonial power. And so that happens many times. But now what we're seeing take place in South Africa is a very, very, very interesting development that is taking place with Julius Malema. So let's take a look at what's taking place here in South Africa. We're going to go to this next link here, so you can go back and read the rest of that at another time if you're so interested. But I want to come to this next article. So when you access this article here, from In Defense of Marxism, please give me a 4. The name of the article is called South Africa, Meaningful Land Reform Means Fighting for Socialism. This is written by Ben Morken. It was written on March 19th this year. This is dealing with the land question in South Africa. When you access this article, give me a 4, please. You'll see a picture of Julius Malema as soon as the article comes up. Malema himself is a Marxist. All right. He understands scientific socialism, which was, interestingly, the position espoused by Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first independent president of the country of Ghana from under colonial oppression. It is also the theory and the ideology of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which Kwame Ture was responsible for putting together in the 60s with the likes of Nkrumah and Sekou Touré of Guinea-Bissau, and also dealing with the likes of like Frantz Fanon and Amilcar Cabral and the many various African revolutionaries who were essential in the liberation movements that took place throughout the continent of Africa and also Asia and also South America, where indigenous peoples banded together at conferences such as Bandung to deal with colonialism and imperialism and neo-colonialism. Basically white supremacy. So this article says, on February 27, the National Assembly of South Africa passed a motion on land expropriation, tabled by the economic freedom fighters and supported by the majority of parties in parliament, including the ANC. Ben Morken in South Africa looks at the real meaning of this proposal and provides a Marxist perspective on the question. The motion was passed, I would say, unanimously by 248-1 against 83, and called for a process to review the Constitution and possibly change it to allow for land expropriation without compensation. You devils deserve nothing in return. Parliament's Constitution Review Committee will conduct public hearings to elicit public comment and report back to Parliament in August. If a constitutional amendment is recommended, It requires the support of 2/3 of members of the National Assembly, as well as the support of the 6 of the 9 provinces. Even then, the last word would be from the Constitutional Court, which is the highest decision-making body as far as constitutional legality is concerned. At the moment, there is no program of land expropriation without compensation in South Africa. The only thing that exists is the parliamentary motion. As a leading ANC member stated, at this stage, land expropriation without compensation remains merely a slogan. But the fact that such a motion was adopted is a consequence of the pressures from below that have been building up over the last 2 decades. This is a grassroots movement, people. This is the impact grassroots movements can have on larger bodies of power. Well, I mean larger bodies in terms of like influence. It comes in the wake of a massive upsurge in the class struggle over the previous period. To some degree, this is now being used by the more far-sighted section of the ruling class to manage the situation from above to prevent it from spiraling out of control. To this day, the government's land restitution process, based on the willing buyer, willing seller principle, has only transferred a paltry 8% of commercial farmland to its original black owners. See, it hasn't done anything. We're getting tired of getting tired for not seeing the change that we're desiring. In 94, the government set a target of 30% to be achieved by 1999. They only got 13. This leaves 72% of the land in white hands, not indigenous to the land, who account for only 10% of the population. In the context of the class struggle in South Africa, the slow pace of land reform and land restitution is a ticking time bomb. The fact that the government has failed to reach even this low target shows that thoroughgoing land reform in the current conditions cannot be achieved on a capitalist basis. And this is what Europeans have spread in the name of democracy. Capitalism. That's what really should be taught governmentally. It's not about the order of government. It's about the order of profit in their particular paradigm. That's what it's about. And power. Profit and power. Currently, the Constitution does allow for expropriation, but stipulates that compensation should be paid on a just and equitable basis. They're going to put that little caveat in there. The meaning of this has never been explained and has never been tested in the court. This is because the ANC government has bent over backwards to accommodate landowners by using the willing buyer, willing seller principle, which is based on the market value of the land. This is even more market-friendly policy than the Constitution requires. In other words, expropriation under the current constitutional provisions is permissible, but the ANC, being appropriated themselves, has generally failed to use it. This is the main reason the slow pace of land reform has led to a buildup of frustration over the past 25 years. Secondary factors of the slow process are the bureaucracy and corruption created by the cumbersome Land Restitution Act. Hysteria. However, the adoption of this motion by the National Assembly has opened up one of the biggest political debates in South Africa in the past 25 years. At the bottom, the response to the motion clearly reveals a class divide. On the one hand, it elicited a furious response of hysteria, slanders, fear-mongering, and outrage from sections of the proprietary class, such as the big white farmer lobby groups. On the other hand, it created a sense of expectation, especially from the rural poor. Now, this is international too, people. Don't think that this is just isolated South African issue. This is international. We're going to see how international this is. So this is dangerous stuff for the ruling class. They are not so much concerned about the intentions of the parties in parliament, which they are able to control. What they are really concerned about is the debate will conjure up uncontrollable forces from below. There's a man from, what's the name of that jewelry company? Oh my goodness. I forgot the name of it. But he's South African based. He says he loses sleep every night thinking about what the lower classes, the middle and lower classes will do to the elite because of the accumulation of power and wealth in the hands of the elite. He loses sleep every night. He's saying we need to consider this. We need to make sure that it may have been, it wasn't the Bears, no, I forgot the name of it. It's a very, distinct, it's a feminine name. Let me see if I can find it right quick. This was a recent statement. Let me see. He's a jeweler. Can't find his name. It was at I think it was at the recent Davos meeting too. Oh man, what is his name? No, that's not Oppenheimer. Let me see. Give me one moment. I'm sorry for the silence. I'm trying to find what this person's name is. And I just saw it recently. Doggone it. Well, anyway, he's just saying he's fearing what's to come because of what the rich have done to the poor. So this is the reason for the open panic about this issue. In the days following the adoption of the motion, sections of the capitalist media embarked on a hysterical campaign unrivaled in recent memory. Every day the newspapers warn of impending doom and economic catastrophe. The ruling class's chorus of doom has been joined by sections of their international colleagues. The Daily Mail screamed white South African farmers to be removed from their land after Parliament vote. This is a lie. The motion does not say that. But why let the facts stand in the way of a good story? The Democratic Alliance, the main bourgeois party, ran a hysterical SMS text campaign saying that the ANC and the EFF are working together to take away private homes. AfriForum, a right-wing Afrikaner lobby group, is petitioning the United Nations and the international community, i.e. the imperialist powers. More than 12,000 people have signed a petition asking Donald Trump to let white people in South Africa immigrate to the United States on an emergency basis. Another petition aimed at European Union President Jean-Claude Juncker, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and British Prime Minister Theresa May has nearly 17,000 signatures. Janice Atkinson, a former member of UKIP and now a British member of the European Parliament, wrote to British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson asking him to intervene. There are petitions about genocide of whites in South Africa committed by communist terrorists. Australian Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton said that the controversy is considering fast-tracking visas for white South African farmers. This is the same government which conducts sea blockades to prevent boat people and refugees from reaching Australia. And of course, apocalyptic comparisons were drawn with Zimbabwe-style land grabs, despite the fact that the situation is not comparable at all. You know how they do, though. That's how they do that. They're drumming up this over-hysterical situation to draw sympathy from others to come to their defense and to demonize and even call terrorists these people who are standing up for their own land. This is exactly what's taking place. The fact that this is a very mild motion calling for a debate and public comment is of little consequence to these people. For them, merely talking about touching private property should be avoided like the devil avoids holy water. The suggestion of making even mild amendments to Section 25 of the Constitution, the Holy Property Clause, which is the basis of capitalist relations in South Africa, was bound to elicit such a response. I'm not going to read. You can get into the rest of this here, and read the rest of this article. It is very, very lengthy, but it is a very great analysis of what is taking place here. So you can read the rest of this article. I just kind of want to present some basic principles of what's taking place in this particular matter here. Now, this next article is very interesting as well. It comes to us from the Africa Report. So when you access this article here, dang it, Morium 70, I got to send this one to you as well. It's not coming up in mine properly, just like breaking it up for some reason. If you could share that, please, I'd appreciate it, Morium 70. This next article comes to us from the Africa Report. It is entitled South African Mines Ministers to Ready Black Ownership Rules by May. So not only is it land, we're also dealing with mines. And that's, of course, dealing with all these different minerals that are found in the earth. From gold to diamond to plutonium to uranium to platinum to whatever have you. Africa, unquestionably, is the richest land of resources, natural resource land on earth. It is the richest natural resource land in existence. It's so interesting that Black Panther recently came out and they're talking about this vibranium. Well, this is exactly what people are doing today in terms of extracting, like Ulysses Claw, these minerals to use them for nefarious and capitalist purposes. Did you get that article, Morium 70? It's got a few articles left after this.
Let me call my name.
See if I can send it to someone else. Maury Shay, I'm going to send this to you. See if you can get in there, because this is too long for me to type. But if you could post this in here, please, I'd appreciate it. I may be able to type it in the meantime. Let's see. You may get it in before I finish typing it in. But I hope these articles that I'm presenting so far have been insightful to you all. I mean, this is some very powerful and profound stuff that we're seeing develop in the world right now. All right, told Albert Bob Moray M70. So now, this is the reclamation of mines, reclaiming the mines. You know, our ancestors is so deep. We had access to quarries, all types of quarries back in the day. We were alchemists. We were metallurgists, long before Europe even was aware of what these things were. You know, we were able to do a lot of different smithing and Masonic work. I don't mean Freemasonry in terms of like being of the arts. Now, we did have our sciences, and we did have our fraternities, so to speak, our universities and our schools, but it wasn't secretive in the sense that it was like nefarious. You know, it wasn't done for dark reasons and for domination. This was, you know, a class of people that prided themselves on being the guardians of society. Now, I'm not saying Africa was an oasis or was a paradise. There were issues undeniably, but the order was more collective. It was more communalistic. Okay? And the resources were not owned by anyone. There was a collectivist mentality that was present amongst the African people. If I had, we made sure all had. Even when you dealt with servitude, even when you dealt with enslavement, you dealt with it from a hospitable and humane sense. It was not denigrating. It was not dehumanizing. It was just. It was fair. as Imam Aliyah states. When you access this article, they'll give me a 4. This is a Reuters article posted on the Africa Report. Get a 4 when you acknowledge your receipt of the article. So we can move forward. At least give me 2 4s. Let me know y'all here and with me. Hopefully I'm not putting anyone to sleep. This information is powerful to me. I hope it's powerful to you as well. Because we need to really assess what's going on. Aliyah says she can't access the article. Can you all access that article? Is it coming up for those of you pressing 4? Hopefully it's coming up. Well, I hope you all can just follow along if you don't have it. So, South Africa aims in this picture to finalize revised plans for black ownership in the mining industry by the end of May. Not to mention there's also the free movement of people push that's going on in South Africa. Yes, Messiah. So Minister of Mineral Resources Gwedi Mantashe said on Tuesday, promising to deliver policy certainty to an industry worried about new costs. All right, Sleeka, give me 1 second again. I got parent duties to attend to. Give me 1 moment, please. All right, back to the grill. So Mantashe acknowledged a lack of consultation between the ministry and the partners in the past, a message that was well received by companies in the sector where uncertainty about the mining charter has deterred investment for months. A draft of the charter, a part of a drive to address lingering racial disparities 2 decades after apartheid, would raise the target for black ownership to 30% from 26% and make companies pay 1% of turnover to an agency to help black communities. Like, this is crazy. Like, how can you even agree to these terms in Africa? These are Europeans in Africa, Western Asians, Caucasians, right, that are setting terms in Africa. Mantashe, chairman of the ruling African National Congress and a former head of the National Union of Mine Workers, met companies and unions the weekend and said that he aimed to reestablish trust. Policy certainty. Uppermost in our minds is that we should ensure that there is a policy certainty, he told reporters in a briefing about the robust and open meeting. The Chamber of Mines, which represents the companies, has suspended a court challenge to revisions to the charter drawn up by Mantashe's predecessor, Mosembezi Zwane, which it says were imposed without consultation. The Chamber says many of those rules are unaffordable for an industry that accounts for 8% of gross domestic product but is grappling with depressed prices and rising costs. Welcoming Mantashe's approach, it is said in a statement, quote, "We are aligned with the minister's thinking that transformation, competitiveness, and growth are and should be mutually reinforced goals." So we're seeing that there's a bunch of transitions that are taking place, but as a result of this transition, there is something wicked brewing. So what I want to present next is an interesting article from the Millennium Report that is actually from Zero Hedge, but I got it off of the Millennium Report. If you can access this article here, I do ask that you give me a 4. This was something that Enoch Mjijiwa, said that he saw in a vision. The name of this article is South Africa on the Verge of a Race-Based Civil War. So this is a matter that is not just being stoked in the United States, people. It's also in Monomatapa. It says time for reconciliation is over. South Africa votes to confiscate white-owned land. What's up, man?
Sure, Father.
I was almost done.
Father, after that, can we play?
Yes. So, those of you who received this, here we go. It says, in South Africa on the verge of a race-based civil war. Just as we warned was likely a week ago. The Parliament of South Africa voted this week in favor of a motion allowing lawmakers to amend the constitution to allow for the confiscation of white-owned farmland without any forms of monetary compensation. The motion, brought by the economic freedom fighter leader Julius Malema, who is a radical Marxist, was overwhelmingly adopted in Parliament with a vote of 241 in support and 83 against. According to News24.com, an English-language South Africa online news publication, there were only a few parties that were against the motion, including the Democratic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, KELP, and the ACDP. The proposal will be sent to the Constitutional Review Committee, which must report back to the Parliament by late August. Confiscation of white-owned farmland was a major topic in the new President Cyril Ramaphosa's platform after he became the fifth president of South Africa since the 1994 democratic transition in mid-February. Quote, "The time for reconciliation is over. Now is the time for justice," Malema told the parliament. "We must ensure that we restore the dignity of our people without compensating the criminals who stole our land." I'm in full support. With over 50 million citizens in South Africa, Bloomberg indicates that a 2017 government report shows white people owns 73% of the farmland. Mad. Quote, "White farmers own almost 3/4 of South Africa's agricultural land, even after 23 years of government efforts to redistribute land to the black majority," City Press reported, citing a land audit by farming lobbying group AgriSA. Some 73.3% of agricultural land is owned by white farmers, down from 85.1% in 1994, the year South Africa first held democratic elections, the newspaper reported. Black ownership has increased markedly in some of the country's most fertile provinces. Black farmers own 74% in the land of KwaZulu-Natal and 52% in Limpopo, City Press reported, citing the report to be released this week. There should not even be a question of who owns the land in Africa. Shouldn't even be a question. Majority ownership. Or shall I say, management. Those who steward the land. Those who keep the land. Right? Again, ownership in an Eastern, in an African mindset and ideology is not even a question. That's not even an issue. Ownership? What is ownership? We take care of this land, but see, we're dealing with a Western mind, though. So total acreage available for farming fell 4% over the 23 years reviewed, as mining and expanding municipalities took over agricultural land, according to economist Johan Boerman, who conducted the audit for the lobbying group. Last week, South Africa's new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, said that he would return the lands owned by the white farmers since the mid-1600s. Listen to that. To the black citizens of the country. He added the country's agriculture must be preserved. Gugile Nkwinta, the former Minister of Rural Affairs and Land Reform until Monday, was reassigned to the Minister of Water Affairs because they have a shortage of water as well, said the ANC unequivocally supports the principle of land expropriation without a compensation. Quote, "There is no doubt about it. Land shall be expropriated without compensation," end quote, he added. On the other hand, the official opposition, Democratic Alliance Party, has criticized the motion, saying white confiscation of farmland by the government will undermine property rights and possibly collapse the economy. Let it fall then. The DA's Thandika Mbamba told the parliament that the wrongs of the past must be addressed, but white confiscation of farmland without compensation cannot be part of the solution. Why not? If you look at worldwide what's taking place in the lands that we possess and how we got terrorized off of lands and finagled and finessed off of lands with no compensation, justice is justice. Right is right.
Hey, Albert, can I use your tablet for a second?
I'm on my tablet.
And you're done?
Maybe. Bye.
Hey, Albert.
I'm sorry, I'm not done. Let me finish first, please, son. The Transvaal Agricultural Union of South Africa, a commercial farmers union in the region, warned the country is in danger of traveling the same path as Zimbabwe, which plunged into famine after a government-sanctioned purge of white farmers in the 2000s, said the Russian Times. as a result of the sanctions that were imposed upon Zimbabwe after making such a decision by the United Nations and other Western-based countries. Not from within. But we need to learn to insulate ourselves. This is what is so important about this matter. We can't depend on outside influences to determine our reality and determine our standard of life and living. When we look at China, China has become completely self-sufficient. When they closed their doors under the Zhaoist regime, under Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong, they came out stronger. They went from the sick man of Asia to a world power. And what did they use to do that? Culture. They used their culture to get back on top. Now, a lot of people have qualms with Mao Zedong, but when you understand that he was China first, and then let's deal with the world. Now, I'm not saying I'm in agreement with what China is doing, even in Africa right now, but I'm saying you have to look at what they've done to put themselves in the position that they are in, and they use culture to do that, and they immunize themselves against the Yorugu virus that our cult about to see on is speaking of right now. Continuing on, where in the world has expropriation without compensation coupled to the waste of agricultural land resulted in foreign confidence, economic growth, and increased food production? Minches says via AustraliaNewsCom.au. Well, you all mastered it. If you look at what Europe has done all over the world, they've mastered expropriation without compensation. They stole the land from all these people through bloodshed and violence and didn't compensate them for anything but more punishment, but more pain, but more misery. That's the compensation that Western civilization has spread to the indigenous people. Freedom Front Plus leader Peter Groenewald warned, if you continue on this course, I can assure you there's going to be unforeseen consequences that is not in the interest of South Africa. So you can see what's going forth there in South Africa. Now this next article is really, really deep. And we're going to see how, I got to send it to you more in 7. These longer articles for some reason don't come up. I don't know why. Let me send you this article here, more AM70. This comes to us from the Occidental Observer. If you're familiar with the Occident is West. It's dealing with the West. Orient deals with the East. The Occident deals with the West. So when Moraim 70 posts this article into the text box, give me a 4 when you access it. It's called Cutting the Throat of Whiteness. The suffering of white South Africans may redeem the West. This is the mindset of many white nationalists. We have to examine the mind of white nationalists a lot. Something that we haven't really done, thoroughly. I mean, I don't know if any of you all visit these nationalist websites and look at these nationalist media outlets and really see what information they're espousing and promoting. It would behoove you to do so. It would certainly behoove you. That's not the article. Mine didn't come up. I have to have Moraim 70 send it to you all when he gets a chance. But this is a very profound matter. Indeed, without having sympathy for those who they crush. This may work. Yep, that worked right there. That's the article right there. So when you access that article, Bavakashah, do give me a 4. Let me send it one more time. Dang it, that didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work. All right, do give me a 4 once you receive this article, please. All right, give me a 4 when you receive that article, please. So we can go ahead and move forward. This is by Colin Liddell. Again, cutting the throat of whiteness. The suffering of white Africans may redeem the West. This is from the Occidental Observer, which talks about white identity, white issues, and white culture. And again, if you have not visited this website, I do suggest that you just come on here every now and then and take a look at the mindset. Let me get one more for an acknowledgement of receipt of this article, Bavakasha, so we can move forward. Yeah, Toda More, I actually got it sent out. Let me get one more for an acknowledgement of this article. Toda Rabbah. So, he quotes Julius Malema, "The time for reconciliation is over. Now is the time for justice." These are the words of Julius Malema, the head of South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party. He calls them a gang, right? To use a contemporary cultural reference point, Malema is essentially the killmonger to Nelson Mandela's T'Challa. Look at this dynamic that they're calling on forth. A more nuanced take on black power, but both of which have proved symbiotic. The words in the quote came in a speech supporting a new bill that was overwhelmingly passed by the South African Parliament by 241 votes to 83, that makes it now legal for the South African government to seize land and other property without compensation. The bill was brought before Parliament by Malema, who also said, quote, "We must ensure that we restore the dignity of our people without compensating the criminals who stole our land 400 years ago," end quote. And even more ominously, quote, "We are cutting the throat of whiteness," end quote. The ANC, seeing the enormous opportunities for graft and personal enrichment as happened in Zimbabwe, where the main beneficiaries were politically connected to Mugabe, quickly fell in line, coming up with some choice phrases of their own. ANC Deputy Chief Whip Doris Eunice Blahude said the current policy instruments, including the willing buyer, willing seller policy and other provisions of Section 25 of the Constitution, may be hindering effective land reform, end quote, while ANC Rural Affairs Minister Gugule Nkwinti added, quote, "The ANC unequivocally supports the principle of land expropriation without compensation. There is no doubt about it. Land will be expropriated without compensation," end quote. Behind all this is the assumption fostered by leftists in the West that Africa was Wakanda before the white man arrived. Now here's where it gets idiomatic. This is where it gets idiosyncratic. Let me say that. It gets idiosyncratic. Here we see the "we was kangs," he says, being the racist that he is, narrative and all its untruth and malice weaponized for a racist attack on white people rather than as a source of cheap laughs for alt-righters. Remember, before whites came to South Africa, this is that empty land myth, most of the land was unoccupied. Certainly by the who? The Bantus, who had displaced the Khoisan people, a hunter-gatherer group with low population density who had been driven into the interior in the early stages of Boer colonization, while all of it was completely underutilized. This is the myth that is taught of Africa. It only became productive and able to support South Africa's swollen population at the hand of the European Boer, they say. Isn't a Boer a damn, pig? Let me stop. Anyway, it is easily forgotten that in 1868, whites were half the population after immigrating, and there were more whites than black Africans. Not true. As Lara Johnstone, a South African activist on behalf of white refugees, so now you're refugees, wrote in TOO, or 2, the advocates of a Boer apartheid republic understood the exponential African population growth would, if unopposed, lead them to being ethno-culturally swamped. A major concern also of prominent Israelis to do nothing amounted to national suicide of white South Africans. They also saw the breeding campaign as an act of war. The breeding campaign. So I'm just living my life and being fruitful and multiplying as the Most High has told me to do. That's an act of war against the European, who is always outnumbered when you look at global population. Apartheid was their political just war of self-defense. Do you hear this? Listen to the rationale for these devils. That is devilish. Apartheid, dehumanization, denigration, and destroying life is a justified act of self-defense. Because you're fearing your, being ethno-culturally swamped. You're fearing being outnumbered. And your power structure being threatened. You resort to destructive measures. What a nature of a beast. The choice before us is one of these two divergent courses, either that of integration, which would in the long run amount to national suicide on the part of the whites, or that of apartheid, which professes to preserve the identity and safeguard the future of every race. Listen to that, right? You're starving people, you're killing people, you're dehumanizing people, with complete scope for everyone to develop within its own sphere while maintaining its distinctive national character. This is Dr. D.F. Malan's National Party in 1947. That is straight counterproductive thinking. That is only the mind of Satan, to actually think that this is something productive for everybody. This is also a counter memorial found in the counter memorial filed by the government of the representatives of South Africa. Judge Jason G. Brent's response to an individual doubting that the implementation of apartheid was an act of just war makes it clear that he, and by extension the pro-apartheid movement, saw the ANC's breeding campaign as an act of war. We must all understand that the most potent weapons of war are the penis and the womb. Listen to this. Therefore, if you cannot convince a group to control its population by discussion, debate, intelligent analysis, etc., you must consider their action in using the penis and the womb to increase population as an act of war. A la eugenics. Masai, quiet, please. This is what eugenic campaigns are based on. This is what Margaret Sanger's ideology is completely entrenched in. These people understand that they are the world minority. For those who are race-based, those who are of the pseudoscience of race, are based in the notion that we must prevent other peoples from proliferating the population of their numbers in order to preserve our numbers, because we do not have, the birth rate that these people do. Even more profoundly is that creation itself wars against us, they would say, because I guarantee you, when you look at places like South Africa, when you look at places like Australia, when you look at places like Israel, where these Europeans find themselves misplaced and in dominance, creation is fighting against them, because the cancer rate, the rate of melanoma, carcinogens, are exponentially high among them. Exponentially high. Australia's number 1. Israel's number 2. South Africa's number 3 for cancer, skin cancer rates for the European. Now, please understand, I am not making this a race-based issue. This is just fact. This is fact. Race is a misnomer. Race is a myth. There's only one race amongst us, the human race. However, within this race, we have two seeds, according to Genesis 3:15, when Yah speaks to the serpent and tells the serpent, I will put enmity between your seed, Satan, and the seed of this woman. Those are the two seeds that are present on earth. And it doesn't matter what color you are. For instance, Yehuda from Iscariot, the one from Yehuda Iscariot, was of the seed of the serpent. Ahab was a seed of the serpent. He had many unrighteous kings. Jeroboam, Rehoboam, was seed of the serpent. Cain was a seed of the serpent. Esau was a seed of the serpent. They came from the seed of promise, but they were seed of the serpent. So it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. It matters what spirit is functioning inside of you. So indeed, this writer goes on to continue. it looks as if the core truth will be made apparent again by the future agricultural aspects of such land under black ownership, at least until the Chinese come in, as they have done in Zimbabwe, and reintroduce an element of productivity, which is not the truth. It didn't take Chinese to come in and be productive for African people. Africans have been productive since the dawn of time in humanity's existence. But the main point here is that such a blatant racist attack has been carried out on white people. It hurts when it comes back home, don't it? When the chickens come home to roost, it hurts, don't it? Without a murmur of protest from anyone in the West. I am unaware of any government protesting this, let alone doing anything about it through sanctions or the threat of military action, which is much more merited than our saber rattling against North Korea. The left, of course, has been silent, secure in their insane narrative that racism can't occur without power, and the accompanying belief that blacks can't be powerful because, well, just because. Well, here's the thing about it. Racism is institutional. Racism is systematic. Racism isn't just about beliefs. I'm sure we have our prejudices and our biases. Undeniably. I got that in my family. But institutionally, and the influence of it and the effect on one's life and the marginalization and disenfranchisement of a segment of society and a specific group of people is not something that African people have done. It is not. The world over. So when you're speaking of the system of racism and who is actually racist, well, history speaks for itself. With some exceptions, certainly not including the neocon mouthpiece, the Weekly Standard, the conservative movement has also said nothing, while even the alt-right have mainly just grumbled about it with a view to getting more views on YouTube that they desperately hope won't be demonetized. In short, it is clear that where their people, Europeans, are being most severely attacked by extreme racism, they are completely defenseless. The fact that whites are a minority in South Africa is a necessary component of their victimization. A very ominous sign for the future of whites throughout the Western world, including Western Europe, given current population projections, where in Europe you will see the Islamic presence predominate. You will see the Arab presence predominate. And African. Because the birth rate among Europeans is diminishing. It is diminishing. Now, let's take a look at that sign spiritually. What is that saying? That's saying the times of the Gentiles is up. Is that what that's saying? Because it's very profound how these things are unfolding. Continuing on, in the debate preceding this crass extension of racist black power, not justice, not righteous expropriation of land, Peter Gronwald, leader of the Freedom Front Plus party, which tries its best to represent the white Afrikaner minority, pathetically asked what would happen once the land was expropriated. If you continue on this course, I can assure you there is going to be unforeseen consequences that are not in the interest of South Africa, end quote, he said. Essentially, the only defense available against the political criminals was to say, stealing this might be to your profit in some ill-defined future, end quote. Next time you're confronted by a mugger, try that line. Just say, taking my wallet might be economically bad for you in the long run. Of course, in a broader political or philosophical sense, this is undoubtedly true, because the thief is more likely to benefit himself if he gives up his thievery and develops healthy economic habits like actual hard work, etc. Like that's something Europe has done to get their wealth. They forget cotton was the crop that took America to the top. And the labor to yield the crop was not white labor. Was it? So let's not be so presumptuous in saying that hard work, it ain't nothing Europe did to move their finger to get wealthy, but trade souls and enslave them. You had to get awful diabolic to get the wealth that you got today. They say that behind every fortune is a great crime. So you got to understand that. So the reason a thief is because he's not able to follow that course. Not that he's marginalized, not that he's, disenfranchised. Some people are thieves by choice. Some people are thieves by circumstance. And if you read Torah, you understand that circumstances are alleviated so that thieves and crime won't be present in society. That's the intent. So that's the kind of population and kleptocracy that the white South Africans now find themselves faced with. That's a lot of audacity for this person to say that without any leverage or support from the wider West to restrain them. For the first 20 years of post-apartheid South Africa, as in the first 20 years after Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, it could be said that blacks retained a sense of awe and respect for whites, as well as a suspicion that the white countries that had pressured their co-racialists into the ANC rule would somehow stand by them. But over that period, these feelings have been slowly chipped away, both by changes in Western culture and by events on the ground in South Africa. Think of what kind of signal Obama sent out to a people who would never elect a white man to rule over them. Also important was the incessant stream of farm murders, each one carried out with unbelievable savagery. I mean, really. We're not talking about, again, King Leopold. We're not talking about De Beers and Cecil Rhodes and the many other numerous white devils that went into Africa and carried out unspeakable, horrendous acts of violence in the hundreds of thousands of numbers. So, and this is the nostalgia. This is the historical amnesia that is present amongst segments of society such as the Occidental Observer. Don't touch that. Don't talk about what will come back upon your head for the crimes that was carried out, not justifying it, not saying violence should be the response of violence, and understanding how Yah told us that vengeance belongs to him. But understand, you got some people that don't submit to that particular ideology. So let's be clear on what has happened in history that has brought about the present circumstances that we're witnessing today. So continuing on. So he says that while much of the sadism employed in these atrocities is endemic to Africa because of what you brought to Africa, Europe, and yes, Africans, part of it at least seems like a dung test to the West, an attempt to twist the tail of the white Western tiger to see if it was truly asleep while its clubs were mangled before it. I'd really look at that in reverse. Receiving the messages of empathy mixed with the cuck signals sent out by white deference to BLM in Wakanda, the criminals of the EFF and ANC felt empowered to strike. The criminals, right? For claiming your land. So you broke into my house, and me claiming my house back is criminal, right? That's criminal for me to say I want my house back, that you done broke in and took, right? I'm the criminal, though, for you breaking in my house, taking my lands, but you say I wasn't using this room, the bathroom. I went in there every now and then, but I didn't go to the bathroom all the time. I wasn't living in my bathroom, so that was an empty land. That was an empty room. So you can take over my bathroom now? For real? That's how that works. I wasn't in my basement all the time, so you squatted, colonized, and took over my basement because I wasn't in there because it was empty according to what your perception was, for real. And me wanting my basement back and my bathroom back, I'm the criminal now? That's how that works? Okay, I get it. You're delusional. White South Africans are the most tragic and potentially the most important people on earth now, as their imminent betrayal, now listen to this, and sacrifice. They're looking at this as a sacrifice, people. This is necessary for us to be empowered, he's saying. So Moray himself, he was talking about this sweet savor to Yah. Well, this is a sweet savor to these white nationalists now. With South Africa unfolding like this, they're like, man, this happens. We need to do what we need to do as a result of this. We need to rise up by any means. So this is what this is. This is a powder keg that we need to keep our eyes on, because this can turn into a lot more. You just saw what happened in Austin, Texas. We just saw what happened in Austin, Texas, and who the targets were in Austin, Texas. So let's keep all this stuff in mind. He says again, white South Africans are the most tragic and potentially the most important people on earth now, according to his perspective, as their imminent betrayal and sacrifice, which will come not only in property expropriated, but in further economic humiliation, degradation, brutal oppression, and bloodshed, may finally serve to demonstrate to the widest possible audience the lies of the left and also disarm the victim narratives that have been so successfully against us, used so successfully against us. Before we can be the avengers, he says, it seems we must first be the victims. And in South Africans, sadly, we have our vanguard, he says. This is a profound article. Now, I really want us to just meditate on this for a moment, because this is how they're looking at this. They're looking at this as a sacrifice, as a necessary sacrifice to empower them to go back on the world stage and carry out their brutalities to go about dominating and securing their future. They're willing to do whatever it takes to secure their future in their existence. And that's why they cry Rahowa. I don't know if you are familiar with that term Rahowa. If you're familiar with that term, give me a 1, because this is what the cry of those who are white nationalists is all about. They're calling for a racial holy war. So when it comes to Enoch Mjijiwa, and I'm not just saying big him up because he received a vision that what this stuff can come down to, he's not far off. If you all are still with me, give me a 7, because I seem to not have received some responses that I asked for. If you all can hear my voice, give me a 7. I asked if you all have heard of the term Rahowa. If you've heard of it, give me a 1. If you have not heard of Rahowa, give me a 0. Okay. So Rahowa is a term that means racial holy war. It is a white nationalist term. It is a white supremacist term that they use to go about carrying out their mission of securing their future as white people, as Europeans, as Caucasians. In justified war, because their progeny, their seed, their continuance, their life, very life is threatened by the proliferation of people, quote unquote, of color. I have one last article to present, which is going to be very interesting. This is going to be a very interesting article, and I hope it connects all the dots. So let me pull this up and get it to you. This comes to us from Israel Today. This is a Messianic Jewish website, interestingly, out of Israel. It was written by Charles Gardner, printed on March 20th of this year. It's called South Africa Eats Humble Jewish Pie. So we read in the beginning how this nexus between Pretoria and Tel Aviv was very, very intimate. Going back to Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, with the establishment of the apartheid regime and the state of Israel in 1948, and the continued support that the apartheid regime received behind the scenes, in closed doors, behind closed doors, from Israel. How you could have pro-Nazi sympathizers and even probably Nazi members harbored in South Africa and welcomed in Israel. How does that happen? Well, when you understand Zionism, we've gone over Zionism in here, but it may be time for a refresher for Zionism. When you access this article, though, give me a 4, please. And this will be my last article here, and I'll close with some reflections and maybe submit the article to the mic to Morey Shebaniah, or maybe open it up. But this will be my last article, so Bavakashah, Todah Rabbah, Faith in Yah. Bavakashah, give me some more 4s. Let me know that you received this article. Again, South Africa eats humble Jewish pie. In the face of an apocalyptic scenario, the South African government has apparently been forced to eat humble pie in its ongoing spat with Israel, they say, right? The 3-year drought that has afflicted the nation has now reached the drastic stage of a looming so-called Day Zero. July 15 this year, when Cape Town, a city of 4 million, will effectively run out of water. That is, they will be cut off from running water and will be forced to line up at collection points for a miserly rationing. Listen to this. This is very profound. Opposition MP Kenneth Mishoy revealed in the Cape Town Parliament last month that both the national and provincial authorities there had refused an offer of help from the Jewish state, who had developed an extraordinary prowess in innovative water technology. The African Christian Democratic Party member said the aid had been turned down in the pursuit of a narrow political agenda focused on boycotting Israel over its alleged discrimination against Palestinians. Right? So they're saying, look, these people are saying we're not going to support apartheid anymore in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I understand what you're doing, but you got some political strings you want to pull with that. If you give us this, what do you want in return? So we got to be shrewd in how we deal with this. Now, we may suffer the technology that you're offering us, but at what cost? Right? So now, an Israeli researcher who attended a water symposium in Johannesburg last month is saying that the South African government is open to the possibility of help from Israel, and that suggestions they had spurned such aid were incorrect. Dr. Clive Lipson, a water expert and lecturer from Tel Aviv University who grew up in South Africa, said ANC, the ruling African National Congress, government officials who addressed me from the audience said they were happy to look at Israel as a model. Whatever the truth about refusal or acceptance, I have not heard any official denial of Mr. Mashoi's damning claim. In any case, the ANC leaders have made their aggressive stance against Israel abundantly clear, accusing it of being an apartheid state, which is obviously based on misinformation spread by the UN-backed Palestinian propaganda machine. But South Africans who lived through apartheid and know more about the situation on the ground in Israel have made their position crystal clear for those with ears to hear that apartheid in Israel is pure fiction, but is very much a reality in the surrounding Arab states. So what they're saying is, like, if you look in, like, Jewish strongholds, Israeli, Ashkenazic Israeli, and even Sephardic Israeli strongholds in Israel, you will see Arabs there, right? You'll see Arabs in their areas. But when you go to the Arab areas, you rarely will see Jews living in their areas. Like, when you go to Gaza, you really won't see any Jews living in Gaza. But if you go to, like, Tel Aviv, you go to even, like, Ashkelon and Ashdod, you'll see Arabs living in, even, parading through there, so to speak. But you won't see that so much in, like, Nazareth, as much as you will in areas where Arabs are. You'll see Arabs with Jews, but you won't see Jews so-called with Arabs as much. Okay, so what he's alluding to is that apartheid isn't really the case, except like in the West Bank, except like in Gaza, and places like that. So that's what the argument is being made there. So going on, a further dose of reality is that a dry country with a scarce water supply has more than it needs due to innovative programs such as desalination. So that's, making it not salty. So this has obviously led to the new approach in Cape Town, which has seen economic free fighters. Another opposition party leader, Julius Malema, challenged those who created water out of nothing to see if it can be done in the Cape. But back in 2016, a Johannesburg conference focusing on the water crisis was canceled due to Israeli participation. There are also wild claims circulating that the drought is a Zionist plot from which Jews stand to benefit. But apparently a fear of dying of thirst is triumphing political correctness. However, I believe the crisis does have a Zionist link, and it is quite simple and straightforward. The South African government has repeatedly and openly spoken against the Most High's chosen people, about whom he said, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. South Africa's leaders have despised the people of the Most High, has chosen to be a light to the Gentiles. Yes, a spiritual light because they gave us the scriptures and they gave us Yahushua, but also a practical physical light in the form, for example, of technical expertise in water conservation, the author writes. It is a marvelous indeed how People living in a desert have turned their country green in fulfillment of ancient prophecies. See Isaiah 35. The scripture speaks of how there will come a time when many will acknowledge the hand of Elohim on Israel. Isaiah 49:23, for example, says, kings and queens will bow down before you with their faces to the ground. They will lick the dust at your feet. But those who oppose Israel will find that they are fighting the Most High, who brought them out of Egypt with a mighty, miraculous hand by making a path through the sea to freedom, while waiting till the plagues have multiplied as Egypt did before repenting over evil plans against the Most High's people. There was a drought in Israel at the time of Elijah, of similar length to South Africa's, and it was only broken after the people turned from idols thanks to the prophet's leadership. South Africa's leaders, I suggest, need likewise to repent and abandon the worship of false idols. We don't have ice cream sandwiches. You asked me that already. And that is my last article. And I want to kind of just reposition some of the alignments in this article in terms of dealing with the Most High's people. Because what we're dealing with is a misidentification. We're dealing with an identity theft that has taken place for the past 1,300 years. And so, as we're dealing with the awakening, and we're dealing with the coming into consciousness and the resurrection of a people, of a chosen people, of a kingdom of priests and a set-apart nation, we're witnessing the transition of power on a magnificent level. But the question remains again, are we in the position to catch the ball, to pick up the fumble when it takes place? Are we able to recover and to make progress, to make forward progress, to cross the goal line, and to go through the uprights, to kick the ball through the uprights and seal our victory in this kingdom that we're seeking to establish? Because that is the question that we must ask ourselves every day, every moment. That is the challenge that is before us. That is the call that has been given for us to execute. And when you look at Israel and you see the divisions that exist with all this camp banging, but the potentials that could exist from the powers that are present within these camps, because we got the body. The body is there. It's just a matter of assembling the body. It's a matter of organizing the body. It's a matter of mobilizing the body and making sure the body is subject and submitted to its head, which is Mashiach Yahushua. That is where we must find ourselves established in. That's the rock that we have to be established in. That's the veil that we have to go through. That's the covenant that we must enter into. That's the knowledge that will lead us to everlasting and eternal life. That we know Yah and the one who Yah has sent. That's everlasting life. That's what will restore us to our land. That's what will cause us to be unconquerable and our land to not be coveted, and for no unclean beast or man to walk through it. This is what Scripture tells us. But it is contingent upon our faithfulness to this covenant. That's the contingency. It's contingent upon the vanguard, the remnant, going up to the land and raising the banner so that the rest of the nations and the rest of the tribes can see Ali Ali Oxenfree, come home, establish this kingdom in righteousness, in truth, in justice, in the spirit of all those things, in the spirit of love, in the spirit of peace. This is what remains for us. This is what this is pointing to with South Africa, the United States, and the political state of Israel. That's why these three factors these three players are so prominent and prefiguring in this ordeal that's taking place right now. And for many, this is not even a blip on their radar. Which is why the Spirit put it on my heart to bring this to the forefront. We have to be aware of this and understand it, discern it, and then analyze it, and then respond appropriately. So we have to find ways to support the EFF. We have to find ways to have solidarity with that particular matter. To empower those who've not received power, who've been disenfranchised, who've been oppressed, who've been tortured, who've been dehumanized, who've been denigrated, who've been destroyed. This is what Zechariah 12 is really telling us about. Moray M70, if you don't mind, let's go to Zechariah 12. And this will be my closing passage. I want to just read this entirely. Read it in its entirety. And then I will go ahead and close this microphone. Let's see. What I can do is just get you all this particular link here. Give me one moment. Okay, you're going to just post the verses with me? So, Jerusalem, a cup of reeling, the burden of the word of Yah concerning Israel. A declaration of Yah, who stretched out the heavens, laid the foundation of the earth, and formed the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of reeling to all the surrounding peoples when they besiege Jerusalem as well as Yahudah. Moreover, this is about land, people. This is about land. Moreover, in that day I will make Jerusalem a massive stone for all the people. All who try to lift it will be cut to pieces. Nevertheless, all the nations of the earth will be gathered together against her, against the people and the land. In that day, it is a declaration of Yah. I will strike every horse with confusion and its rider with madness, reminiscent of the valley of Jehoshaphat. Reminiscent when the Edomites and the Moabites smote each other, and the Philistines smote each other as they were coming to destroy Israel, particularly Judea. I will keep my eyes on the house of Yehudah, but will blind every horse of the peoples. Then the leaders, this is the key verse I was wanting to say, Messiah, please let me finish, I'm almost done. Then the leaders of Yehudah will say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are my strength through Yah Sevaot, their Elohim. This is where we must draw our strength from. This is where we must even gravitate towards eventually. This is where our strength is found, in Yah, because those who are in Jerusalem are getting their strength from Yah Sevaot. They are informing and empowering us so that we can do what we must do to bring forth the kingdom to the four corners of the earth. This is what the Torah shall come forth from Sion and the word of Yah from Jerusalem is truly speaking about. Continuing on, verse 6, in that day I will make the leaders of Yehuda like a fire pot in a wood pile, like a burning torch among sheaves, because the fire is going to be present in the land of Israel too. But Yehuda and its leaders will be untouchable. They will be protected. They will be covered. They will be completely under the shelter and shadow of the Most High. They will devour on the right and on the left all the surrounding peoples. Yet Jerusalem will remain in her place. In Jerusalem, the people will be unmoved from the land that Yah has given them. Jerusalem, the people, will be unmoved from the land that Yah has given them, Jerusalem. Yah also will save the tents of Yehuda first. This is what Yehuda is leading the path for. This is why Yehuda broke camp. When you see the ark moving, when you see the four living creatures, Yehuda was the lion that was leading the cow, was leading the eagle, and was leading the man. With the ark in the middle, the throne of Yah in the center. Because Yehuda will be the first. Your brothers will praise you, Yehuda. Up from the prey you rose. This is what Genesis 49 is talking about. Yah will also save the tents of Yehuda first, so that the honor of the house of Dawid and the honor of the inhabitants of Jerusalem will not exceed that of Yah. In that day, Yah will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He will defend, he will cover, he will protect. He will ensure the safety of those who are the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the weakest among them that day will be like Dawid. And the house of Dawid will be like Elohim, like the angel of the Most High before them. They don't say they will protect the inhabitants of any other place but Jerusalem. We must be gathered. We must come together. We must be established in Yah, in the place that He has chosen for Him to defend us, to protect us, to cover us. Not by what we believe, but by what the Word says. It will happen in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come up against Jerusalem, mourning the pierced one. This is where we can see South Africans now. This is where we can see the Israelites in South Africa now, because they were pierced too. You had hundreds die when those Israelites were massacred. You think that was the end of it? You have Steve Biko murdered. So many countless others. Patrice Lumumba murdered. You can just run off names of those who were murdered by the beast. Then I will pour out on the house of Dawid and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of favor and supplication, when they will look toward me whom they pierced. You've done injustice to me and my people, right? They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn. In that day there will be a great mourning in Jerusalem, mourning like Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo. The land will mourn clan by clan, the clan of the house of Dawid by itself, and the wives by themselves. The clan of the house of Nathan by himself, and their wives by themselves. The clan of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves. The clan of the Shemaites by itself, and their wives by themselves. Each of the remaining clans will mourn by itself, and their wives by themselves. Selah. So, this is what we must prepare ourselves for, Israel. We must prepare for the resurrection. We must prepare for the expropriation, for the turning over of deeds, of the said deed, the title deed, back to the righteous inhabitant. This is what the Yobel, the Jubilee, is all about. This is what the Shemitah is all about. And we got to understand, this is a dynamic principle. This cycle, you see it all the time. 7 years, you see the cycle. Now, in the matter of the crisis, what opportunities are we seizing? What opportunities are we seizing in the midst of all these crises that are taking place? Because we should never let a crisis pass without taking advantage of an opportunity to do what must be done. To do what must be done. I'm not saying just exploit it for the sake of exploitation, but position yourself in the midst of it to take advantage of it and let Yah be esteemed. Give Yah the honor. And do all things as unto Yah, even in the midst of crisis. So with this South African situation, which I pray we continue to keep our eyes on and see how it develops and understand its extenuating factors that will reverberate from whatever takes place with this. This is a very pivotal and crucial situation to keep our eyes on. And I pray that we are positioning ourselves spiritually, mentally, and even physically to go about understanding how to move forward righteously and properly and in alignment, in accord with the Spirit. And so with that, I want to go ahead and conclude my offering with that and pray that all the words that have been spoken to you today have been insightful, have been edifying, have been praiseworthy. And if it has been, please give all esteem to Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King, because it is through Him that this information truly does come and is synthesized and put together and is shared. If any truth has been spoken, again, all praise to the Most High. And I pray that what has been given has been worth your while, has been timely, and has been also engaging, and not just, some random information that is just shared for the sake of sharing information. I pray that you saw the dots that were intended to be connected with that, between the true Israelites, the Zionists, between the three lands that are mentioned in this particular matter here, because it's very powerful when you really see how this nexus aligns. And especially when you can see the true players and the actors in this drama unfolding. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close with a Hatzi Kaddish. You can open the microphone. Or Morey Shebanaya, are you going to come to the mic, Morey Sheb, or are you finished, or do we want to actually open the mic? Hallelujah. All praise to Yah. Morey Sheb, are you want me to open it, or do you want to come to the microphone? Okay, Beseda. So I'm going to close with a Hatzi Kaddish, and then I'll open the microphone, and we'll proceed from there. So with that, in the spirit of prayer, hallelujah. Yikadal va yikadesh shemei rabah, bi'amadi v'ra kerutei v'yimilich malkutei, v'chayachunu v'yamichunu v'chayei l'kol beit Israel, bagalav izman kari v'imiru, amen. Yehi shmei rabah mavorach le'olam ul me'almaya, yit barak v'yishtabach, v'yipa'ar v'yit romam v'yit nesei, v'yit hadar v'yit alei, v'yit alal shemei l'kudisha berechu, v'yela min kol barachata v'ashirata, tush bechata v'nechmata, Damiran ba'ama b'shem Mashiach Yahushua Baruch Hashem Hallelujah V'imiru Amen. So with that, Mishpachah, I want to say Shavua Tov to you who are in the Holy Land. Shabbat Shalom to the rest of you on the diaspora. We will open the microphone and pray that any and all who has something to say, to please come and share. Moriam 70 made a offer this morning for you all to come to the mic, and we do invite you, we do welcome you, and we'll go forward from there.